My father has been expanding and making profits in the company founded by my grandfather. Now, that father of mine promised to hand over a mansion, which could be called a luxurious villa, to me, but what's yours should be mine since I'm your husband. So this mansion is mine. I'll hire you as a housemaid, and if you don't like it, you can divorce me. Turns out, even though the mansion was supposed to be in my name, my husband had secretly written his name on the papers. Does he really think that's okay? Does he even understand the consequences? My name is Erin. Not to boast, but I was born as the daughter of a wealthy family. That's because my father is the CEO of several companies. Originally, my grandfather, my father's father, had started a small shop selling and repairing TVs and music systems, gradually making a profit. I heard they even opened several branches. After growing it into a successful company and further expanding its achievements, my father took over the reins as the CEO. And perhaps my father had great foresight. Before computers and their accessories were widely popular, he began selling them. Plus, he probably studied hard since they also offered repair services. This move turned out to be a goldmine, and the company grew exponentially. Aside from the IT-related business, my father also ventured into the real estate business, making even more fortune. He collaborated with various local businesses and actively contributed to community development. My mother worked as the vice president of the company, and after studying IT in college, I joined my father's company. You might think we lived an extravagant life hearing all this. But in reality, we didn't live as lavishly as those depicted in TV dramas. Perhaps my father was trying to instill good values in me. He believed that spoiling a child would not help them grow into a responsible adult. Sure, our family home was spacious, and we even had a maid. But as a child, I helped with household chores, and we only ate at fancy restaurants once or twice a month. While we might have traveled slightly more than most, it was only one international trip a year, with the rest being local. So, my school life felt pretty normal. And I doubt anyone could have guessed my family was wealthy unless told. Thanks to my seemingly ordinary character, I dated guys from my age group, like any other girl. One of those guys, named Michael, later became my husband. We met as colleagues at the same workplace and got closer over time. Back then, I worked as a sales representative and office manager at an IT-related shop, and Michael was also a sales rep there. I hadn't told my coworkers that my father was the CEO, so Michael probably found it easier to approach me. During our dates, I realized that he was straightforward and had no reservations. Although I didn't want any extravagances, I always suggested places within Michael's budget. At restaurants, he would order large servings for both of us. When I asked why, he'd say, "If there's extra, I'll eat it, so better to order more." It was clear he wanted to eat as much as possible without spending a lot. Some women might have found him a bit stingy. But I found it endearing. I never told him, but I earned several times more than he did. I felt I was paid fairly for the responsibilities I held. Without realizing, I had become accommodating. He always tried to find ways to fill his stomach on a budget, and I was totally okay with that. When we dated, I'd often buy extra food or gifts, knowing he'd enjoy them. For instance, when we went shopping for clothes, I'd buy him extra socks. Sometimes, when I got a new bedspread, I'd buy him pajamas and a pillow on the side. I loved seeing him happy. He didn't hesitate to accept these gifts. When I visited his home, I'd cook for him and even clean up. It didn't bother me at all. One day, out of the blue, Michael proposed to me. "There's no one better than you. Marry me, Erin." But at that moment, I had some reservations. After all, my father is the CEO of a major company, and he's also at the top of my current workplace. I was worried that if Michael found out about this, he might back off. So, I decided to take him to my parents' home for the first time. I wanted to introduce him to my parents and tell them everything. If he accepts all that, I'd be more than happy to marry him. And so, Michael's first visit to my family home was about to happen. Michael seemed pretty nervous, but my dad, although strict at times, is generally a calm person. When I introduced him as the man I was considering marrying, my father welcomed him with a warm smile. I think that eased some of Michael's tension. But he was quite surprised when I revealed that my father was a CEO. Still, throughout the visit, things went smoothly since my father was very supportive of Michael. As we left the house, Michael exclaimed, "Man, that house was huge and magnificent. I was so surprised. And I'm glad Aaron's dad is so kind. I think we can get along." When I added, "Apart from this house, my dad owns some buildings and a vacation home," Michael looked even more astonished. But Michael made up his mind. He was going to marry me, the daughter of such a prominent man. Of course, I nodded in agreement. We eventually became a married couple, but there was one thing that bothered me. When I accepted his proposal, I noticed a slightly mischievous grin on his face, just for a split second. I brushed it off, thinking it was just his way of smiling, but maybe if I hadn't overlooked it, I could have avoided the upcoming tragedy. Michael and I eventually moved into a typical, not overly luxurious, apartment. I believe he understood the significance of my father's status, but I never told him exactly how much I earned. So I was always careful to live modestly. However, slowly Michael's words and actions began to change. After moving in, while I worked and took care of the house, he started to demand more. One day, as I was preparing dinner, he asked, "What's for dinner tonight?" I replied, "I made your favorite, curry rice." But for some reason, he looked dissatisfied. Sitting on the sofa, he sighed and said, "Curry's fine, but I kinda wanna eat something like a prime beef steak once in a while." I was taken aback, since he'd never complained about my cooking before. "But prime beef is pretty expensive, isn't it?" I said. Michael clicked his tongue in annoyance. "Come on, given how much your dad earns, having prime beef once in a while isn't gonna be a big deal." He reluctantly began to eat the curry. Seeing his attitude for the first time, I felt sad and said, Okay. I'll get prime beef for tomorrow." He smirked and said, "See? That's what I'm talking about. We should be able to do that normally from now on." Indeed, with my salary, buying prime beef isn't a big issue. But considering my lifestyle until now, I wasn't eager to spend that much. Yet, I didn't want any issues so early in our marriage. Resigning myself, I decided to actually cook prime beef steak. However, Michael's lavish tendencies didn't stop there. He would frequently request expensive ingredients for meals, and if we went out, he'd specify upscale restaurants. His luxury cravings weren't just limited to food. "We gotta have a TV larger than 60 inches. And maybe we should buy a massage chair, given how tiring work is every day." Such remarks became more frequent. It was getting out of hand. I didn't see the need for such a large TV, and massage chairs aren't cheap either. So, I finally retorted, "Do you think we're made of money? You're living too lavishly." Michael made a displeased face and clicked his tongue again, saying, "What? I've told you, what's the point in living so stingily? I'm your husband, you know. Don't just complain to me so easily. I'm also contributing to the household expenses. You should listen to me." That's what he blurted out. But I couldn't understand what he meant at all. Just because he's the husband, doesn't mean he can act high and mighty. And just because he pays some bills, doesn't mean he can do as he pleases. I never saw it that way. While Michael does give some money towards the household expenses, it isn't a lavish amount by any means. In fact, and I never told him this, I actually contribute more money. If I acted like he said, his contributions would feel like mere pocket change. Yet he says these things without any hesitation. I had started to question Michael's way of thinking. He wasn't like this before. Why had he changed? At that moment, I really didn't understand. For now, I just said, "All right, I'll think about it," to settle the matter. However, the answer to his audacious behavior became clear just a few days later. That day, my dad had asked me to wait in the office of our IT shop where I worked. He said he had something important to discuss. And while Michael was working, my dad walked into the office and began to speak. "I don't know how much longer I can continue as the CEO. It might depend on you, Aaron, but there might come a time when you'll need to take over. I'm thinking of transferring the vacation home to you. What do you think? It was a pretty serious conversation. By the way, the vacation home, which I'd briefly mentioned to Michael, was like a large lodge located about a 30-minute drive away. It was a place where my father used to host gatherings with the town's shop owners under the guise of meetings. Nowadays, there aren't any meetings, but the house is always ready to be lived in, maintained by a housekeeper. And he said I could use that vacation home however I wanted. Hearing this, I was torn. Honestly, I had no idea how to use such a property. After all, this vacation home is over 6,000 square feet, with a lavish garden surrounded by nature. You could even call it a mansion. But I don't have the social connections to host big parties there. However, after some thought, I figured I could keep it as an asset. So, I told my dad that I'd think positively about it but wasn't ready to decide yet. My dad said, "There's no rush. Whenever you're ready, just sign this contract." And left a contract on the desk before leaving the shop. I thought I'd give it a day and went home after work, leaning towards accepting the mansion. But the next day was unexpected. When I arrived at work, Michael, who usually gets there before me, wasn't in the shop. Wondering what was up, I entered the office, and to my surprise, Michael was there. "What are you doing here?" I instinctively asked. He then flashed a document in my face, saying, "I overheard the conversation about the mansion yesterday. Sounds like an amazing deal, right? So, I went ahead and signed it." The document he was flaunting was the very contract my father had given me the previous day. Shockingly, he had written his own name on it. "What? What on earth are you doing?" I was utterly taken aback by his actions. But Michael, without a hint of guilt, said, "Why not? Your dad said he's giving away an amazing mansion, right? If you won't decide, I figured I'd take it." He said this with a smirk, but there was no way I could accept it. He said that with a laugh, but of course, I wasn't convinced at all. "You really think it's okay to do that? That house is worth $4 million, you know? Plus, my dad told me he's gonna give it to me." I pleaded desperately, but Michael didn't listen. $4 million bucks. Damn, that's impressive. What an unexpected treasure. And think about it. I have the right to this mansion. Because you're my wife, and I'm your husband. So, I have a right to what's yours. Moreover, your dad really likes me. He probably won't have any complaints. So, from today, this villa is my house. You're too stubborn. If you live in a wealthy house, you gotta make use of it. How about I hire you as a maid in this mansion? If you have any complaints, I'll divorce you anytime." He said all that with such confidence. That's when I remembered all of Michael's past actions and words, and it finally clicked. He probably has no qualms about taking from others. Even if it means practically stealing, he doesn't seem to feel guilty. I always gave him things when we were dating, but he never gave me anything. I was satisfying myself by giving him things, so I never realized. Maybe my nature corrupted him. He might have thought what's mine is his. My dad was always kind to Michael, so maybe he felt my dad was easy to manipulate. And maybe he thought I was even more gullible. In the end, he probably felt I would do anything if he complained. And by marrying me, he felt he got everything. When I figured it out, a plan formed in my mind. So I told him, "Fine, then this mansion is yours. But I'm not gonna be your maid, so let's get a divorce. Take care." Saying that, I went back to my job and called a divorce lawyer during my lunch break. I decided to proceed with the divorce process. I don't know if he was trying to act tough or not. "Do you really think you can divorce me, huh? Well, I'm fine with it. I'm so lucky, just by getting close to you I got this house. I'm gonna cancel the lease on my current place. I don't need that small house anymore." He blurted out, probably half-truths. But little does he know. Tragedy is about to hit him. He just hasn't realized it yet. After that, I went back to my parents' place and told my father everything. From then on, everything went according to my plan. A few weeks later, Michael called me, sounding extremely panicked. Well, it's understandable. He received an enormous bill.
Why the heck do I have to pay $2 million?
Anyone would be shocked to receive such a bill. But it's only fair. Why? It's about the fixed property tax. I told you the house was worth $4 million. So you should expect to pay around that much. I casually replied, but Michael seemed totally clueless. But that's just because he lacks knowledge. It's common knowledge that if you own a property, you have to pay tax on it. Normally, if I had received it, my father would have probably paid the tax. But after hearing my story, my father was furious. Even though he's usually calm, he can be very strict. I had warned Michael about that.
He can have it if he can afford it,
my father said, and accepted the property transfer to Michael. To be honest, I probably just wanted Michael to learn a tough lesson. Of course, there's no way Michael could afford that amount.
Come on, do something about this. This isn't funny.
Even after being cornered, he's still talking like that. I have no sympathy left for him. So, I decided to give him a final blow. By the way, the property tax is about $60,000 annually. I later found out that Michael always had this mindset of trying to take advantage of his friends. This might have driven his friends away, leaving no one to teach him common sense. Considering that, maybe I was a bit unreasonable too. I once found Michael cute. But now, I don't feel that way anymore, so I hung up the phone. Afterwards, Michael couldn't live in the house and was forcibly evicted. My father knew he couldn't afford it, so he changed the deed back to my name and ended up paying the gift tax. As for Michael, he was fired from his job and was charged with unlawfully changing the property deed. He was scolded by his parents and shunned by acquaintances. Now jobless and friendless, it seems his parents are close to disowning him. He's been living in a rundown apartment, working odd jobs and barely scraping by. As for me, I've been slowly preparing to take over my father's company. My father told me, "You won't succeed in business if you're always looking for shortcuts." It felt like he was reminding me to reflect on the fact that I almost married Michael. But now, as I get involved in running the business, I deeply feel the truth of his words. Nowadays, I'm pushing forward, inspired by my father's greatness every day.